All right, we're back with chapter 24. I willed it to happen. The next day, during the Sunday performance, Hans went through the quadrille in complete command of himself and Barina, watching only Colonel Podchaski as a musician watches the concertmaster. He cued Barina so skillfully that a regular spectator might not have noticed that a boy instead of Barater Whittick was the rider. At the finale, when he sat erect and immobile, doffing his hat in thanksgiving to Charles VI, Hans suddenly saw a vision of himself as a small boy in his nightshirt, praying in his little cubicle of a room. "Thank you, Lord, for my daily bread, and God bless Mama and Papa and Anna." And now, in the few seconds while the musicians were thrumming their last flurry of notes, and while he held his hat at arm's length, he felt like that little boy again. His thanksgiving did not stop with Charles VI. It included Xenophon and Colonel Podchaski, and Guerinier, and de Pluvinel, and Papa, and Prince Eugene, and Barater Whittick, and, most of all, Maestoso Barina. It had been a long journey to this moment, yet even as Hans rode out of the hall to the pleasant sound of applause, his sense of triumph was tinged with a nagging worry. Time was slipping away. He'd be an old man before he did the corvée. Time was running out for Barina, too. If they didn't work together on this movement soon, how would he ever make Barina a champion again? He had to do it. He must do it, or else all of his years at the riding school would be like clawing and clambering up a steep mountain without ever reaching the summit. Here they are, doing their Sunday dance, and here he is walking off. Do you think that's a realistic perception of time? Is he going to be an old man before he learns everything he needs to know?
No.
Probably not.
He'll probably be a man instead of a child.
Maybe, but not an old man. That noon, as he sat at the cafeteria with Kurt and the other apprentices, the food lumped in his throat and brought on an attack of hiccups. He alone, of the 4 apprentices, was still working on the ground. If only he hadn't fallen off when Barino reared. If only he hadn't looked up at the waving beret. If only Jaquez had stayed at home. A week later, all of the ifs were washed away when Barater Whittick said quite calmly, "The time has come for your work above the ground." The quiet words were a bombshell. Hans was standing in the center of the arena, and it was very early in the morning, just past 7. 2 other apprentices were working with their riding masters at either end of the hall. They seemed wholly unaware that today, at this moment, he, Hans Hop, was about to learn the mysteries of the corvée. They were in the world of their own, unconscious of any other world, and he, too, would be like that. Barater Whittick read his thoughts. "Whatever happens now, Hans, no one will notice. To think you are being observed is self-conceit. The other riders and trainers are so busy sweating out their own problems that what happens to you is no matter. You could fall off a dozen times without their noticing. The truth is," he said, taking another notch in Barina's girth strap, "a fall or 2 is to be expected. I, too, have had my share." He stopped as if his lecture were over, but it had only begun. "Remember, Hans, you must create a living work of art. The corvée must express sublime beauty. Instead of a paintbrush and canvas or a chisel and stone, you work with living, responsive tools. Muscle and sinew and heart." Hans nodded. He supposed there had to be all this preliminary talk, but he could hardly bear the delay. Then Barater now pointed to the special deerskin saddle. "Note there are no stirrups. Even in practice, you will have no stirrups." Hans nodded impatiently. He knew the corvée was ridden without stirrups. He knew that long ago from the pictures he'd pasted on his mirror and from the time he had watched in rapture from the imperial box. "So now you understand why, in the beginning, I wouldn't let you even think stirrups," the Barater was saying. "Balance is everything. Now I demonstrate." Hans felt as if every nerve in his body were quivering like the feelers of a butterfly. Straining to detect the aids, he watched the riding master mount Barina, ready him, walk him head on towards Hans. Suddenly Barina showed excitement. Nostrils distended, eyes fiery, muscles bulging. He knew what was expected of him. Then, with pure animal grace, he sank back on his haunches, lifted his body to a 45-degree angle, bearing his whole weight on his hindquarters, and for the barest instant he seemed to freeze. Then he made a mighty leap forward on his hind legs before touching his forefeet to the earth. With all his looking, Hans had detected nothing, not a flicker of Barater's hands, nor a trace of movement in his legs. In obvious pride, Herr Whittick dismounted lightly as a boy and rewarded Barina. Now it was Hans's turn, and now came the spate of directions. "Your hands, keep them quiet yet flexible. Your seat, steady and still. Your back, erect, slightly forward. Let your calves do the urging, but lightly. Restrain him with the reins. Time your hands and calves together, promptly, nimbly. Don't help too strongly. Don't hurry him. Don't pull up." His head spinning with do's and don'ts, Hans swung aboard. He collected Barina until he felt the stallion's readiness. Then, trying to remember everything at once, he gave the urging aid with his legs, and in his eagerness to help, he lifted up with the reins so vigorously that Barina almost keeled over backwards. And before Hans could blink, he was sitting deep in the sawdust. It was his second spill in a week. Quick as a jack-in-the-box, he was on his feet again, expecting the sharp criticism he knew he deserved. Instead, the barrator seemed to take the fall for granted. His voice was even, and his smile kindly, as he remarked, "That was a quick lesson, Hans." Before the session was over, Hans tried once more. It was a near failure again, and this time he leaned too far backward, and if the riding master had not barked, "Go with Barina," Hans might have fallen off again. Why was it so hard to think of the right things at the right time? In the next few weeks, Hans began to appreciate the subtleties of the corvée. He knew now why it had required so much preparation. It had taken Jays just to understand what Barrator meant when he said brace your back to form a supple connection with Barina's back, and it had taken many more days to actually do it. There he is, falling on his butt. Colonel Podchowski studied Hans's progress with interest. As he stopped to exchange horses one morning, he rode over and spoke to Barrator Wittick. "It is beautiful how Hans waited for the rare compliment to himself, but Colonel finished his sentence, "how he sinks back on his haunches, hocks well bent before he leaps. A superb test of balance." Oh, who's he complimenting?
The horse.
The horse. Then he turned to Hans. "I see that your balance improves, but it does not yet equal Barina's." His eyes twinkled. "Study the Prince Eugene monument, Hans. When you can sit like the prince, then you are well on your way." The proud morning came when Hans sensed strongly for the first time Barina's eagerness to leap. Quick as thought, Hans responded. He urged him with his legs, spoke to him with his hands, and the signals and the readiness were timed, and then it happened. The beautiful, perpendicular leap. At last, Hans experienced the joy of flying. There's a picture of the statue. "I just willed it to happen," he said shyly to Kurt and Herr Braun that night, and it did. Lessons went on. They were necessarily short because of the muscle strain on Barina, but each morning the miracle happened, and now Hans's resolve deepened. He tried to will a second corvée. Barrator Wittick suspected as much. "Ach, Hans," he said with warm understanding, "it has never occurred to you that Barina is nearing 30 and slows down with age? Even he is mortal and destined to die." "I don't think about it, sir," Hans replied. "I won't think about it." Barrator Wittick's eyes shot sparks of blue. His voice was brusque. "If you can always influence Barina to do one magnificent jump, you will be a credit to the Richel and a surprise to me. Mind you," he waggled a sharp finger, "any stallion, regardless of age, that can leap even once on his hind legs is a great artist." "Yes, sir," came the small, meek answer. Hans had worked hard and long hours before, and now he worked harder and longer. He took up his old habit of evenings at the library. He studied von Weyrother on the corvée. He studied von Holbein. With Fraulein Morgan's help, he struggled through the English works of the Duke of Newcastle. Why would he need help for that? Does he speak English?
No.
No. Speaks, I think, Austria. They speak German, maybe? I don't know if
I thought they might.
they speak in, I think that's what they speak. By day, he listened to Barrator Wittick as if he were God, handing down the 10 Commandments. Pardon that technical difficulty. My phone fell down. All right. So by day, he listened to Barrator Wittick as if he were God handing the 10 Commandments. And yet one mighty leap was all Barina would do for Hans. "Maybe you should be satisfied with just one leap," Herr Braun suggested one evening as Hans was pacing up and down the room and around the everlasting chess game. The pacing stopped suddenly. Hans wheeled about, not caring if the game was done or not. "I should quit now?" he demanded angrily. Then imploringly, "Please help me, sir." All right, all right. The chess game was at an impasse. Herr Braun spoke in an aside to Kurt. "An intermission will do us both good." Then he turned to Hans. "You've got to think the second levitation," he said, leaning back in his chair, squinting through half-closed eyes. "You've got to think it before the first one is done. Think it right through your hands and legs and seat into Barina's being. Suppose you give yourself an examination. Write down precisely what you should do and when, then tomorrow do it. Sometimes it can be as simple as that." Sitting on the bed, writing as fast as his pencil would go, Hans finished his list in less than 10 minutes. After showing it to Herr Braun, he tucked it under his pillow. His sleep that night was dreamless, but even so, the written words seemed to work magic. The next day, Hans put them into action. To his utter joy, Barina executed 2 spectacular leaps, one right after the other. The aftermath was electrifying. When next month the programs were printed, Hans's name appeared twice. In the quadrille, of course, but where it mattered was in the 7th event, Airs Above Ground. There, in big black bold type, was Barina's full name, Mitoso Barina, and directly opposite, Rider Candidate Hopped. So he's not an apprentice anymore. He's now a rider candidate. How exciting.